Welcome to CPS 2231. Today we're doing a video on Chapter 8, Multidimensional Arrays, Part 2. Today we are specifically talking about two-dimensional arrays in a little bit more depth, further than we did in class the other day. A couple reminders. I want to remind you that Program 3 is due tonight at midnight. Tonight being February 8th. And I am introducing homework assignment number 1 as well. You can find homework assignment number 1 on Blackboard. You'll see that it is a document to be handwritten. Remember, I want you to print this packet out and handwrite your answers on the packet. I do not want loose leaf handed in. It makes it very difficult for me to find all of your answers. So I want you to write it in the spaces provided. If you need to go onto the back of a page, that's okay. Just clearly indicate that. Homework 1A, which is posted right now, is questions 1 to 18. Those are due on February 15th at the beginning of class. That is 1 week from the day that this video is posted. Homework 1B will be posted after this date. It has question number 19 in it, and it will be due on February 22nd at the beginning of class. I want you to note that these are due at the beginning of class, not at midnight, because you're going to be handing them in to me physically. If you are not present on that day, please make sure you scan or take a very good photograph of your pages and send them to me over email. Today I'm going to start with a little programming. I want to do a little bit of practice work with arrays. So let's go ahead and open Eclipse. And in our Chapter 8 project, let's go ahead and create a new class. Let's create this class. Let's call this class 2dim array. And we will make a main method. Now, in this particular class, we're going to do all of our coding in the main method. Let's go ahead and create a two-dimensional array. We're going to go back to that example that we've seen a couple times in class dealing with a seating chart, as you see here. So let's first create our array. So in order to do that, I'm going to say string brackets, brackets, seating chart equals curly brace. When I hit enter, it puts in the nice curly brace for me. Remember, I suggest that you always go to the end of the closing curly brace and put your semicolon in now, because you will forget otherwise. Then I move back up into the in between the two curly braces. And remember, a two-dimensional array is an array of arrays. So I'm going to create my first array right here. So open curly brace, quote, John, end quote, comma, quote, Mary, end quote, comma, quote, Ted, end quote, end curly brace. That is my first one-dimensional array that is inside my two-dimensional array. That's the first row of my two-dimensional array. So now I'm going to put a comma in, and I'm going to make my second row. So curly brace, quote, Susan, end quote, comma, quote, Jake, end quote, comma, quote, Amanda, end quote, end curly brace, comma. And on to my third row. Curly brace, quote, Sean, end quote, comma, quote, Jen, end quote, comma, quote, Al, end quote, end curly brace. And I'm not going to put a comma at the end of this end curly brace because I am actually done creating my array. And the last item you never put a comma after. In the same way I didn't put a comma after Ted. Over here, I don't put a comma after my last inner array here. Okay, so just like we learned in class the other day, I'm going to just print this array out in table form, just so I can see what it looks like. So I'll put a little comment to that effect. I'm going to say printing in table form, which we haven't really talked a whole lot about yet, is what we would consider to be in row major order. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means in a couple minutes. So I'm just going to put a little print statement here that just reminds me what I'm doing when I actually see my output. I'm going to say printing in table form. Now, remember, we learned this in class the other day. The outer loop, remember, we need to do a nested loop, and the outer loop controls the rows. So I'm going to do my standard matrix, my standard array loop here that you should have memorized at this point. I'm going to use the word row, but you could use I if you wanted to. So I'm going to say for int row equals 0. Row less than seating chart dot length. Remember that seating chart dot length will be the number of rows in the array. And then row plus plus. Now, remember further that the inner loop controls the columns. So I'm going to do that same standard loop again, but with one small change, aside from the fact that I'm going to call it col instead of row. I'm going to say for int col equals 0, col less than, and here's the small change. I'm not going to say seating chart dot length. I'm going to say seating chart of row dot length. Remember, seating chart of row dot length, where row is any given row number, will return the number of columns. So seating chart dot length gives me the number of rows. Seating chart of row dot length gives me the number of columns. So then here I'm going to say col plus plus. So remember, this inner loop is looping through my columns, while the outer loop is looping through my rows. So here I'm going to do a nicely formatted output statement. I'm going to say system.out.printf. And I see that Amanda has 6 characters in it. So I want to do at least 7 spaces for my formatting here. So what I'm going to do is, and this might not make sense at first, but follow along. I'm going to say quote percent -7 or -7 s, end quote. This s indicates that the thing I'm going to print here is a string, and that is because all of the items in my array are strings. The -7 indicates the way that this is going to print, and we'll talk more about that in a minute or two after we see how it prints. And after the quote, I'm going to say comma, and what I need to put here is the element in question. So I'm going to say seating chart, and in the first brackets, I'm going to put row, and in the second brackets, I'm going to put col, because I want to print the element at row col. Now remember, whatever I put right after the inner for loop will happen at the end of each row. So what I want to happen at the end of each row is I want to move to a new line. So I'm going to say system.out.println. So at the end of every row, I'm going to move to a new line, because remember, printf will not do that for me automatically. So now let's go ahead and run what we have so far and see how it looks. And you can see that this works out nicely. Now let's just see what this minus does right here. For a moment, let's remove it. Let's just do %7s. And you'll notice that when you do that, it lines everything up based on the end of the string, just like it does with numbers. For numbers, that's a nice look. We want the ones places all lined up, and the tens places all lined up, and the hundreds places all lined up. But for strings, that just doesn't look right. So if I put the minus in there, that indicates that the extra spaces that are needed go at the end of each word rather than at the beginning. So the extra spaces for John are actually here. Okay, and so that's what that means. Okay, great. Let's delve a little bit more deeply into the concept of row and column major, though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a system.out.println right here. And I'm going to get ready to delve more deeply into row and column major. But first, I'm going to end this video here. And I want you to proceed on to the next video where we will discuss row major order versus column major order.